Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. Today's discussion is going to be all about trauma, healing intergenerational trauma. We're going to talk about entrepreneurship, your story. With that, I have a special guest, Katherine Lewis. She's an entrepreneur, teacher, engineer, and cycle breaker, and she's got a fantastic story, and I'm happy to highlight her story for the guest. So, Katherine, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, kind of talk about, we talked about backstage, but tell people your story and, we'll delve into more of the specific questions.
Absolutely. So, I am the executive director of the Leon Foundation of Excellence, and we work with high school students. All right, so we work with young adults and high school students ages 15 to 25, and we help them heal intergenerational patterns of trauma. So, an example of that could be if you were part of a family where, let's say, the grandfather was very abusive to your father, and then the father did the same thing to you, right? Those are those generational cycles. And we want those to stop with our young people so they're not perpetuating them as they move on through their own life, into their career and their partnerships. And we do that through an online curriculum and in person programs. And we've been serving students for the past almost 8 years now.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I've been reading a lot about just kind of, I guess you could call it intergenerational trauma, but talking about just kind of how the energies of the ancestors are kind of passed down. And, I see it in, my parents' generation, my generation, my kids' generation. So talk about this idea of what is intergenerational trauma? How does it get passed down? How do you heal it? Kind of for the audience.
Absolutely. So, intergenerational trauma can be passed down through what we call epigenetics. So, it's your environment, it's the condition that you're in, it's just the not only the physical environment, your home. It could be kind of the toxins that are around you, but it's also the behavioral environment in terms of how are we interacting with each other? What behavioral patterns are we demonstrating? And there we could go in depth on different things, but there's studies around, children who are raised by parents, let's say, who may be overweight, and then how that affects the next generation and then the third generation, right? We see these studies during depressions and wartime, and we can see that those epigenetics will actually affect the physical body. But then we have the emotional side as well, where there are these different patterns. So let's say that my parents didn't allow me to cry or feel any of my emotions, and I had to suppress everything and just hold it inside my body through tension, through stress. And let's say I don't discover that feeling my feelings is okay. And so then when I have children, I perpetuate that with them, saying, no, you can't cry. Don't feel your feelings. You're fine. Those kinds of things. Then that just replicates this pattern. There are many different ways to heal it. It just depends on what we're trying to heal in particular. But counseling, obviously, therapy, those can be super helpful, allowing yourself to feel those feelings, to grieve. A lot of times we hold sadness in the body, and that grief can turn into and manifest as depression. Being able
Mm-hmm.
to journal and talk through our past and really understand, what was it that we were experiencing? How did it affect us? And then go back and talk to those who we're upset with, right? And sometimes we interpret things as young people, and they're not actually that way. I remember for my own self that I interpreted my own family's behavior in ways that if I was an adult observing their situation, it would be like, oh, yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily the best way to go about it, but I understand that they're stressed. I understand that they're experiencing their own feelings. And when you're a child, it can be hard to have that kind of empathy for the adults around you who are supposed to be nurturing you and caring for you. So it's working through these patterns and looking at the past and understanding how to release all those emotions that we can then gain the tools and the self-awareness to not replicate those patterns or try and reduce it progressively as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because you bring in the genetics component. I never thought of it in terms of genetics, but I thought it was all just kind of behavioral traits. But I was kind of reading these two books simultaneously. One is Psychology of Wealth, but he's talking about these kind of like in my grandparents' generation who grew up during like the world wars, and so they were always their mantra was, the government's going to save you, social security. And then after that went away, like my parents, it was like 401k, pensions, work for a company for 60 years or become a professional. And then like our generation was 9/11 and 2008 COVID. And it's kind of like, you can't trust anybody. You can't depend on anybody, which is really interesting. And then the other book is this, the body knows a score. So where we store trauma and patterns in our body, and it's kind of like, that's as we grow older, we're like heavier, and like kind of like my kids' generation, they're a lot lighter and freer. So um, I'm not sure if you have anything to add to kind of storing emotional pain and trauma in your body, but I'm happy to elucidate that for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I have read the second book, and so I'm familiar with that. I will say that for me, I can see that within myself. As an example, when I get anxious, sometimes I'll scratch my head, right? And that's just a personal example. But we can look at how we store these things in the body, right? So maybe when you're emotional, you eat a lot of food, right? Or maybe
Mhm.
you feel very lethargic and you just want to take a nap because you're actually scared and it feels like things are out of control and you just want to hide under the covers, right? It can manifest in so many different ways and it's going to be personal to each person. But it's important that we notice these patterns and we notice, where are we getting tension? Are we having a concave chest because we're trying to protect our heart because we don't feel like it's safe to be emotionally open? These are all things that you want to be aware of in your body because it holds on to these different patterns. And when we're young, we start to form the idea of how the world is. Can we trust people? Can we not? Is it safe? Is it not? Can I love openly? Can I not? And all of
Right.
that gets stored in the body unless we do this work to recognize, okay, I thought that there was a bear chasing me, all throughout my childhood, as in the bear maybe being an abusive parent or something like that. And then you have to stop and look around and say, all right, I'm okay. I'm not in the woods. Right now, in this moment, I am safe and I am okay. So, what unnecessary feeling or what tension am I holding in my body that I can now consciously train myself to let go of? And it's through that process that we heal.
Yeah, I love this idea. Kind of this idea of letting go. And one thing is talking about is but the next question is talking about pivoting into kind of taking your pain and making it into your promise, and talk about like becoming an entrepreneur and how to pivot and excel in what you're doing now, based on your previous pain.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, for myself, I had a pretty average childhood, but from my own perspective, I felt neglected. I felt like people weren't emotionally available or there for me. And I had a lot of feelings around not being good enough. And that manifested in me kind of asking my dad to leave my life at age 13 when my parents divorced. And so we were separated for 13 years. And it was through that time that I ventured out on my own to try and heal, going to therapy, reading different books, talking to people, finding mentors. And through that process, I thought, wow, I wish I had a community that would do this with me, right? Where we were all healing and doing this work together. And I noticed a lot of my peers at the time, being in high school, there weren't a ton of other people who were going through that process. I think nowadays, really since the pandemic, we've talked about mental health a lot more, especially for young folks. But at the time, that wasn't a hot topic. And I wanted to create something for other people who were struggling. So that way they could get exposure to new ways of thinking and know that they weren't alone in going through that process and could feel supported in even starting the process. Sometimes we're carrying around so much that we don't even know where to begin, and we just need someone else to catch us when we fall. Like we just want to break down into a puddle and we want to know someone's going to clean us back up, right? And so that's what birthed this organization. And so you're so right in saying that a lot of entrepreneurship is trying to solve a pain point, trying to solve a problem. And that's where we get the energy and the passion to keep going, because starting a company is really hard. I mean, we're almost 8 years in and we're still constantly pivoting and trying to find our way and trying to hone in further and further on our correct audience and how we reach them, how we keep them engaged. And that's just the process of running a business. You're constantly refining. And so you've got to have a lot of passion behind that to keep going, because it's really difficult unless you are so dedicated to solving a particular problem.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And a lot of my colleagues, they wanted to excel, or because of their dad or mom didn't love them enough, or they grew up without anything, so they, their mantra is, accumulate as much as possible so they never have to feel that way, which is kind of really interesting. It's kind of all starts with balance. And then one thing is, you talk about breaking into tech. So kind of talk about, your how you're using tech in your entrepreneurial endeavor, and we'll talk about, excellence and leadership, but kind of talk about breaking into tech.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have kind of a day job and a night job. And so my day job is working as an engineer at a tech company, while running the organization at night. And moving into tech was a very interesting journey for me. I started off in business, became a teacher, and then moved into engineering. But the thing that helped me the most break into tech for my own journey was all of the emotional intelligence, self-awareness, empathy and compassion, being able to relate with other humans and communicate well. So ironically, that was what really helped me get into the tech world, not so much the engineering skills. Of course, they had to be there, but those are things that you can teach people and you can help them learn. It's a lot harder to teach people how to be empathetic or compassionate or good communicators. It just takes longer, and sometimes there's not as much willingness. Depends on the person, but that was
Yeah.
an interesting journey that allowed me to do a lot of work that also is related to healing these patterns, but the patterns are more around people with disabilities and helping them with creating accessible digital online worlds. And how do we stop that pattern of marginalizing people, and how do we, support everyone and help everyone have access to opportunity and just the normal things that we all want to be able to do in life.
Yeah, and then now we talk about this, the disability. Talk about why you have a particular passion for the community, and talk about why the tech community needs to embrace the disability community.
Yeah, again, that passion comes from a personal pain, right? So I had a family member who acquired a disability and had to go through that process, and you start realizing just how much more room there is to grow. So, as an example, they lost hearing in one ear. And as we'd go for walks, let's say down the path, you'd have bikers that would just come up silently behind and just fly on by and not say anything. And so I started to realize, wow, they don't know that this person can't hear them. You can't see that, right? It's an invisible disability. And yet, if they just had the courtesy to always say, hey, on your left, then they would be okay. They wouldn't be so startled when people pass by. So it opened my eyes just to how many ways in the real world and then in the digital world, things are inaccessible and there's a lot of room to grow. Because I work in the digital world, I started looking there and seeing, okay, are developers following accessible principles? Are they checking before they launch and code to production? Are they seeing if it is accessible for all different types of disabilities, and recognizing gaps there and starting to mentor people in that area and reinforce standards and create checklists for designers and for product managers and for engineers? And it's changed so many things. It's been really incredible just to see how many people are passionate about this. And so, yeah, I'm a huge advocate for engineers and designers thinking about accessibility before they create something, because it costs a lot when we launch inaccessible code.
Yeah, I love that. And then, kind of building on that, talk about building foundations of excellence and leadership starting in your backyard.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my philosophy is excellence starts at home, right? If we are walking through our own neighborhood and are unwilling to pick up trash, then why are we focused on, doing something somewhere else, right? If we are not treating the people within our own home with love and kindness, why are we putting on a front to our colleagues or people out in public, right? Everything starts in the home. And then we can take it one layer deeper, which is everything really starts inside of us. And that's why we have to do this work and focus on healing the internal. So that way, every time we're having an interaction with someone else, it's coming from this place of love and understanding and the desire for growth, a desire to help and lift up one another. And so, yeah, whether you are an executive, whether you want to start a company, whether you're a stay at home parent, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. We're all humans and have the opportunity to be a leader and to create a foundation of excellence by starting in your own backyard.
I love that. And then kind of talk about, we're kind of coming closer to the end of the conversation, but then talk about the how to have better relationships and how to make new opportunities.
Yeah. I have my own podcast. It's called Opportunity Made, and you can find it on Apple and Spotify. And basically, I love hearing people's stories and just identifying how they created new opportunities for themselves. A lot of times we grow up thinking, well, if only I reach this point, if only I have that much money, or I have that kind of house, or I'm wearing those kinds of clothes, or I live in that kind of city, then I will have arrived, right? And yet there's opportunity everywhere. Wherever you are, you have the opportunity to do good, to make money, to serve someone, to solve a problem. And so I love having conversations and recognizing how, if we're just very intentional with our lives, there's a lot that we can do. You don't have to have a certain amount of resources or know certain people in order to make a difference or to have the kind of life that you want. So that's what I would say, just around opportunity. And again, if anyone's looking to heal those intergenerational patterns, like pull out a journal, start writing throughout the day what you're feeling, what you're noticing in your own body, the different habits that you have. Like the best way to solve problems are to confess them and to say, okay, I have an issue with this. I'm struggling with that. And go tell somebody who loves you and cares about you. So that way you can start recognizing the issue and heal some of these patterns.
So well said. So lastly, talk about this Leon Foundation of Excellence and how people can contact you, check out your work, follow you on social, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. We're on all the social channels at Leon Youth, Leon Youth. You can check out the website at Leon FE, short for Foundations of Excellence, leonfe.org. If you are a student who is ages 15 through 25, you can take our online course for free, and it'll walk you through healing these intergenerational patterns. If you are local in Colorado, you can also reach out and take some of our in-person programs, depending on the location. But if you're a parent of someone who needs some help, I also highly recommend going to the website and checking out our online course.
Yeah. And what a fantastic podcast. And, I love this idea of healing intergenerational trauma, the importance of it, and starting your own company, making a difference. All of Catherine's resources will be in the links and show notes, and check those out. Follow her on social. And with that, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you for having me.